Self-control is the quiet force that determines whether potential becomes progress or remains unrealized. It operates beneath the surface, shaping decisions long before results appear. Transformation does not begin with dramatic change or external opportunity. It begins with the ability to govern your inner world consistently. Without self-control, talent is wasted, vision is blurred, and effort becomes scattered, no matter how sincere the desire for change may be. Every lasting transformation requires the capacity to delay comfort in favor of growth. Self-control teaches you to choose long-term alignment over short-term relief, even when no one is watching and no immediate reward is guaranteed. It is the discipline to show up when motivation fades and to remain committed when results are still invisible. This inner restraint becomes the framework that supports sustainable progress rather than temporary enthusiasm. When self-control is absent, emotions dictate behavior, and behavior becomes inconsistent. Inconsistency creates unstable outcomes that reinforce frustration and self-doubt. By mastering self-control, you interrupt this cycle and replace reaction with intention. You move from being driven by impulse to being guided by purpose, creating a steady rhythm that allows transformation to unfold with precision. Self-control also sharpens awareness. It forces you to pause before acting, to observe patterns, and to recognize triggers that previously went unnoticed. This awareness builds clarity, and clarity builds confidence. As you gain command over your responses, you stop wasting energy on regret and redirection, conserving strength for actions that actually move your life forward. True transformation requires identity-level change, and self-control is the gateway to that shift. Each disciplined decision reinforces a new self-image, proving to yourself that you are capable of consistency and authority. Over time, these repeated confirmations alter how you see yourself, and that internal upgrade naturally reshapes your expectations, standards, and actions. Self-control is not about suppression, but about alignment. It is the ability to say no to what distracts you so you can say yes to what defines you. Rather than limiting expression, it refines it, ensuring that your energy is invested where it produces growth. This alignment prevents burnout by eliminating unnecessary conflict between desire and direction. As self-control strengthens, resilience increases. Challenges no longer derail momentum because responses are measured instead of emotional. Setbacks become feedback rather than proof of failure. This stability allows you to remain anchored during uncertainty, maintaining forward motion even when conditions are unpredictable or demanding. Transformation accelerates when self-control becomes habitual. What once required effort begins to feel natural, and discipline evolves into identity. Decisions become faster and clearer because values are already established. This internal order reduces friction, allowing progress to compound quietly and consistently over time. The foundation created by self-control supports every other form of growth. Skills develop faster, focus deepens, and opportunities are handled with greater competence. Without this foundation, success becomes fragile and difficult to sustain. With it, growth gains structure, direction, and durability. As self-control continues to mature, it reshapes how you engage with time, energy, and responsibility. You become proactive rather than reactive, intentional rather than impulsive. This shift transforms not only what you achieve, but how you experience the process of becoming more capable, more focused, and more aligned. Reality does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you repeatedly do. Desire can be intense, sincere, and emotionally charged, yet still produce no tangible change. The world operates on patterns of behavior, not on hopes or intentions. Discipline is the language reality understands, and it translates consistent action into visible outcomes regardless of how motivated or unmotivated you feel. Many people confuse wanting with working, believing that strong emotion should somehow substitute for structured effort. Desire may ignite interest, but without discipline, it quickly burns out. Reality remains unmoved by enthusiasm that lacks follow-through. Only when desire is harnessed through disciplined behavior does it gain the power to shape circumstances and generate progress. Discipline creates predictability, and predictability creates results. When actions are consistent, outcomes become inevitable rather than accidental. Reality reflects what you practice daily, not what you occasionally attempt. This is why small, disciplined actions often outperform grand plans fueled by sporadic motivation. Consistency quietly outperforms intensity over time. When discipline is absent, life feels unstable and unfair. Effort becomes scattered and results appear random, leading to frustration and self-doubt. In truth, reality is simply mirroring the lack of structure behind the actions taken. Discipline removes randomness by aligning effort with intention, turning hope into a process instead of a wish. Desire seeks comfort, discipline seeks progress. Desire asks how to feel better now, while discipline asks what must be done to improve later. Reality rewards the latter because it compounds over time. Each disciplined choice may seem insignificant in isolation, but together they create momentum that reshapes circumstances with precision. Discipline also exposes truth. It reveals what you actually value, not what you claim to value. Your schedule, habits, and routines are a more accurate declaration of priorities than any spoken goal. Reality reflects these priorities faithfully, delivering outcomes that align with demonstrated commitment rather than stated ambition. Without discipline, setbacks feel personal and overwhelming. With discipline, setbacks become data points to refine strategy. Reality responds differently when actions are grounded in structure because structure allows for adjustment without collapse. Discipline provides the stability needed to persist through resistance without abandoning direction. As discipline strengthens, external chaos loses its influence. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and begin creating progress within imperfect ones. Reality shifts not because circumstances change, but because your response to them becomes controlled and intentional. This internal consistency forces external alignment over time. Discipline builds credibility with yourself. Each completed action reinforces trust, making future commitments easier to honor. Reality reflects this growing self-trust by opening space for greater responsibility and opportunity. Capacity expands as discipline proves your readiness to handle more without self-sabotage. When discipline becomes the governing force, desire finds its proper role as fuel rather than direction. Wanting becomes secondary to doing, and outcomes become measurable rather than imagined. Reality mirrors this shift by responding with clarity, momentum, and tangible progress that confirms disciplined action as the true source of transformation. Hot governance is the unseen authority behind every action you take and every habit you maintain. Before behavior ever becomes visible, it is rehearsed internally through patterns of thinking that either empower or limit response. When thoughts are unmanaged, behavior becomes reactive, driven by emotion, fear, or convenience rather than intention. Governing the mind establishes order at the source where all action originates. Uncontrolled thoughts create internal noise that weakens focus and fragments effort. One moment you are committed, the next you are doubting, delaying, or distracting yourself. This inconsistency is not a character flaw, but a leadership gap within the mind. Thought governance closes that gap by creating mental structure, allowing decisions to be made from clarity rather than impulse. Every belief you hold issues silent instructions to your behavior. If those beliefs are limiting, behavior will unconsciously obey them even when logic disagrees. Governing thoughts requires identifying these internal commands and deliberately replacing those that undermine progress. As thinking becomes intentional, behavior follows with greater precision and confidence. Emotional reactions are often the result of unexamined thoughts accepted as truth. When the mind is not governed, emotions dictate movement and restraint disappears under pressure. Thought governance introduces pause, creating space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice replaces reaction, and behavior becomes an expression of control rather than compulsion. Consistency in behavior is impossible without consistency in thinking. Random thoughts produce random actions, while disciplined thinking produces disciplined behavior. By repeatedly choosing constructive thoughts, you create a mental environment that supports follow-through. Over time, this alignment reduces internal resistance and increases execution speed. Thought governance strengthens self-command. Instead of negotiating with doubt or fear, you recognize them as signals rather than authorities. This shift allows you to act despite discomfort, maintaining direction even when emotions fluctuate. Behavioral power grows when action is no longer dependent on how you feel in the moment. As thoughts become governed, decision fatigue decreases. Clear thinking reduces the number of internal conflicts that drain energy. With fewer mental distractions, behavior becomes more efficient and purposeful. This efficiency compounds, making progress feel less forced and more natural. Governing thoughts also reshapes identity. Repeated thinking patterns reinforce self-perception, and self-perception dictates behavior. When you think in alignment with growth, discipline, and capability, behavior adjusts to match that identity. Actions then reinforce the new self-image, creating a reinforcing cycle of control and execution. Behavioral power is sustained by mental clarity. Without clarity, effort leaks into overthinking and hesitation. Thought governance filters distractions, prioritizes focus, and directs energy toward meaningful action. This clarity allows behavior to remain steady even under stress or uncertainty. As mastery over thought increases, behavior becomes an instrument rather than a struggle. Actions are chosen, not forced, and discipline becomes an extension of identity rather than an act of resistance. The governed mind becomes the command center from which consistent, powerful behavior flows naturally into every area of life. Discipline is often misunderstood as limitation, but in reality, it is the structure that makes freedom sustainable. Without discipline, choices are driven by impulse, and impulse eventually narrows options rather than expanding them. What feels like freedom in the moment often becomes confinement over time when there is no framework guiding decisions. Discipline provides that framework, allowing freedom to grow instead of collapse. True freedom is not the absence of rules, but the presence of control. Discipline gives you command over time, energy, and focus, preventing them from being wasted on distractions that produce regret. When you discipline your actions, you reduce chaos and create space for intentional living. This order becomes the foundation upon which meaningful choice is built. Undisciplined behavior creates dependency on circumstances and emotions. When mood determines action, consistency disappears and progress stalls. Discipline removes this dependency by anchoring behavior to commitment rather than feeling. This independence from emotional fluctuation is what allows freedom to exist even under pressure or uncertainty. Discipline also protects momentum. It ensures that effort continues even when motivation fades or obstacles appear. Without it, every challenge becomes a stopping point. With it, challenges become part of the process rather than reasons to quit. This continuity preserves forward movement and prevents stagnation. Freedom expands when discipline sharpens focus. By eliminating unnecessary choices, discipline reduces distraction and mental overload. Fewer decisions mean clearer direction and stronger execution. This clarity frees mental energy for creativity, growth, and strategic thinking rather than constant recovery from poor choices. Discipline creates reliability, and reliability builds trust with yourself. Each time you follow through, confidence strengthens and self-doubt weakens. This internal trust removes hesitation and fear, making action feel less risky and more natural. Freedom grows as self-trust replaces internal resistance. Without discipline, success becomes fragile and difficult to maintain. Any progress gained through motivation alone is vulnerable to collapse. Discipline stabilizes success by making progress repeatable. This stability allows you to enjoy achievement without the anxiety of losing it. Discipline also increases capacity. As you manage your habits and routines, you free resources that were previously consumed by correction and recovery. Energy once spent fixing mistakes is redirected toward expansion and opportunity. This surplus creates room for greater ambition and impact. When discipline becomes integrated into identity, effort feels lighter rather than heavier. Actions align with values, reducing internal conflict. Instead of fighting yourself, you move in a single direction with coherence and purpose. This alignment transforms discipline from obligation into empowerment. The highest level of freedom comes from self-mastery. Discipline refines behavior so that choices are intentional and outcomes are predictable. As control increases, dependence on external validation and circumstance decreases. What once felt restrictive reveals itself as the very mechanism that allows freedom to grow stronger and more stable over time. Standards and boundaries exist to protect what matters most, not to isolate or limit growth. Without them, purpose becomes vulnerable to distraction, misuse, and erosion over time. When everything is allowed, nothing is preserved, and the clarity of direction begins to fade. Purpose requires protection in order to remain strong, focused, and effective. Standards define what you accept, tolerate, and pursue. They act as internal guidelines that shape decisions long before pressure arises. Without clear standards, choices are made reactively, influenced by convenience or external opinion. Strong standards create consistency, ensuring that actions remain aligned with long-term intention rather than short-term comfort. Boundaries reinforce standards by controlling access to your time, energy, and attention. They determine where you invest yourself and where you withdraw. Without boundaries, even good opportunities can become distractions, slowly pulling focus away from what truly matters. Boundaries preserve energy so it can be directed toward meaningful progress. Purpose weakens when access is unrestricted. Not everyone deserves proximity to your goals, and not every demand deserves compliance. Boundaries create separation between what supports growth and what drains it. This separation is not selfish, it is strategic, allowing purpose to develop without constant interference. Standards also elevate self-respect. They communicate internally and externally that your time and direction have value. When you uphold standards, you reinforce your identity and reinforce commitment to your own growth. This self-respect strengthens resolve, making it easier to remain disciplined under pressure. Without boundaries, compromise becomes habitual. Small concessions gradually reshape priorities until purpose becomes diluted. Boundaries interrupt this process by establishing non-negotiables. These non-negotiables provide stability, preventing gradual drift away from original intent. Standards shape the environment around you. What you permit influences what grows, and what you tolerate becomes normalized. By enforcing standards, you curate an environment that reinforces focus, discipline, and progress. This environment then supports purpose instead of competing with it. Boundaries also reduce emotional fatigue. Constant accessibility creates mental overload and reactive behavior. By limiting unnecessary engagement, boundaries preserve clarity and emotional stability. This stability allows purpose to remain central rather than buried beneath constant demands. As standards A, ND boundaries are maintained, decision-making becomes easier. Clear guidelines remove hesitation and reduce internal conflict. With fewer decisions draining energy, more attention can be given to execution and growth. Purpose gains momentum as friction decreases. Over time, standards and boundaries transform from rules into identity. They become an extension of how you operate rather than something you enforce consciously. Purpose thrives in this structure, strengthened by consistency, protected from dilution, and sustained through intentional limitation. Radical responsibility begins the moment you stop assigning power over your life to external factors. Instead of asking who is to blame, you ask what is within your control. This shift immediately removes the comfort of excuses and replaces it with the clarity of ownership. When responsibility is accepted fully, progress becomes possible because energy is no longer wasted on justification. Excuses thrive where responsibility is avoided. They offer temporary relief by protecting ego and avoiding discomfort, but they quietly delay growth. Radical responsibility exposes excuses for what they are, distractions from action. By eliminating the need to defend inaction, responsibility redirects focus towards solutions and forward movement. When you accept full responsibility, circumstances lose their authority over your mindset. Challenges no longer define outcomes, responses do. This perspective transforms obstacles into variables that can be adjusted rather than barriers that must be endured. Responsibility shifts attention from what happened to what can be done next. Radical responsibility also clarifies accountability. You no longer wait for motivation, permission, or ideal conditions to act. Action becomes a personal standard rather than a reaction to external pressure. This independence strengthens consistency and removes reliance on fluctuating emotions or encouragement. Excuses often mask fear of failure or success. By taking responsibility, you confront these fears directly instead of hiding behind explanation. This confrontation builds courage and resilience. Each decision to own the outcome reinforces self-trust and reduces hesitation in future actions. Responsibility sharpens awareness of patterns. Instead of repeating cycles unconsciously, you recognize how choices produce predictable results. This awareness creates leverage, allowing deliberate adjustment rather than repeated frustration. Growth accelerates when patterns are acknowledged rather than denied. Radical responsibility simplifies decision-making. Without excuses, options become clearer and choices more direct. You stop negotiating with yourself and start committing. This decisiveness increases momentum and reduces mental fatigue caused by overthinking and self-justification. As responsibility increases, victim mentality dissolves. You stop viewing life as something happening to you and start viewing it as something you actively shape. This shift restores personal authority and confidence. Control returns to the individual rather than remaining scattered among circumstances. Responsibility also improves discipline. When outcomes are owned, follow-through becomes non-negotiable. You no longer blame lack of progress on time, people, or resources. Discipline strengthens because action is tied directly to identity rather than external validation. Over time, radical responsibility creates alignment between intention and behavior. Words and actions begin to match, eliminating internal conflict. Excuses lose their relevance as ownership becomes habitual. Progress becomes consistent, not because conditions are perfect, but because responsibility leaves no room for avoidance.